Alright everybody, we're now into the top 50 greatest atheists of all time according to the ranking standings extant. Number 50 we have Ludwig Feuerbach. He wrote the 1841 The Essence of Christianity, which I read. I didn't find it that great, but it influenced or became the basis of Freudian atheism and also Marxian atheism. He did write the very intelligent 1850 The Natural Sciences and the Revolution, where he said that someday the natural sciences would dissolve the Christian worldview in a vat of nitric acid. Very intelligent statement. 49 we have Salman Rushdie, who in 1988 published the Satanic Verses, wherein he put a spin on the story of Muhammad such that Muhammad was influenced by Satan. He tried to have sex with one of his angels.
Mohammed Sadiq is a British Muslim scholar.
When God sends messengers, God puts in messengers special qualities, and there are these qualities which hinder any satanic influences. So Prophet Muhammad, he was a pure prophet.
And that all of his wives were prostitutes or something along these lines.
People say that I've called Muhammad's wives prostitutes. It's not true. I've done no such thing.
This incensed or shocked the Muslim world.
He has portrayed our prophet like an animal, and we object to that strongly.
And the Ayatollah of Iran put a $3 million fatwa or hit contract on his existence.
The Satanic Verses. They bought it not to read, but to burn.
Blasphemy is a capital crime in Islam, punishable by death.
2 months ago, the first book burnings.
But if somebody swear at our prophet and our big persons, we won't tolerate.
But author Salman Rushdie claims his book was not an attack on the Muslim faith.
What I was trying to say, there are two sections which say when a new idea comes into the world, a great idea like Islam, it has to answer two questions. One is, what do you do when you're weak? And the other is, what do you do when you're strong?
Number 48, Francis Crick, an anti-vitalism materialism philosopher and DNA co-discoverer. His view is that Christianity may be okay between consenting adults in private, but should not be taught to young children.
Francis, if he were here, would have much to add to our discussion. He was, as many of you know, a devout atheist, which is not to say a militant atheist. He probably did more than anybody I know to demystify the nature of life and the nature of consciousness. In fact, he was working on that problem on his very last day here on Earth.
Now that we're at Francis Crick, we need to clear up a few things. In 1953, Crick and James Watson discovered the structure of DNA. After that, everybody was flagging around the idea that DNA was the principle of life. So we already saw that Steven Pinker chirped out that Darwin and DNA explained what life was scientifically. That's incorrect. To exemplify this, 10 years after the discovery of DNA, Francis Crick got into these vitalism debates with people like Michael Polanyi and Pierre Teilhard, who were promoting different varieties of vitalism. Polanyi, for example, stated that an enzyme molecule cannot be totally described in terms of physics and chemistry. In 1966, Crick got to the point where he was getting sick of all these religious vitalists trying to say that creationism is in this bound over here, or God created this atomic structure over here. And he got to the point where he said, let us abandon the word alive. And this is the start of what's called abioism, which means that the smaller you go down the chain of being to things like viruses and bacteria, you start to lose the definition of life according to physics and chemistry. 47, we have Daniel Dennett. He is a philosopher known as one of the four horsemen of New Atheism, along with Hitchens, Dawkins, and Harris. His 2006 Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomenon is kind of like a soft atheism introduction.
Why is this of such concern to you, Dan? If my faith doesn't pick your pocket or break your bone, as Thomas Jefferson said.
Yeah.
Why should you care what I believe?
Well, exactly. I wouldn't accept that religious people care so much about what everybody else believes. Why do they care? Why do Christians care what Muslims believe? Why do Muslims care what Christians believe? And to me, the really dangerous thing about religion, and this is not everybody, of course, it's not half, thank goodness, but it's many, and that is the one thing that I think is really dangerous in many religions is that it gives people a gold-plated excuse to stop thinking.
To stop thinking?
To stop thinking. To say, I don't have to think about that because my religion says this is right, this is wrong, it's as clear as that, it's black and white, I don't have to think about this anymore. It's just a matter of faith.
Ooh.
And we honor that. We say, oh, it's a matter of faith. I think we have to stop honoring people for stopping thinking.
Sigmund Freud, the eponym of Freudian atheism, his statement was, why did none of the devout create psychoanalysis? Why did one have to wait for a completely godless Jew to create this subject? He published The Future of an Illusion, 1927, when he presents a Cicero-style dialogue on the nature of the gods, albeit in the guise of Schopenhauer's dialogue on religion. And in his 1939 Moses and Monotheism, suggests that Moses, if he did exist, was a follower of Akhenaten's monotheism. Now that we're into Sigmund Freud, we're into some of the deeper waters of atheism. Specifically, barring several hours of prolonged discussion, Freud was trained under Brooke, who was part of the so-called Helmholtz school. And Brooke, Helmholtz, and Raymond signed a blood and oath that they pledged to put in power the truth that no other forces than the common physical chemical ones are active within or between organisms, meaning that they signed in blood a pact that they weren't going to allow any sort of God-based vitalism into the mechanisms of physiology. Freud would go on, by the time of his 1895 manuscript, A Project for Scientific Psychology, the draft notes of which are shown here, to state that the intention is to furnish a psychology that shall be a natural science, that is to represent psychical processes as a quantitative determinate state of a specific material particles. In the future, psychologists will exercise a direct influence by means of particular chemical substances on the amount of energy and their distribution in the mental apparatus. So, having learned from Helmholtz the concept of free energy and bound energy, or temperature times entropy, this being the total energy of the system, he began to dissolve the concept of God's energy and power in terms of physical, chemical, thermodynamic formulas, as he was aiming to apply to psychology. Kurt Vonnegut, he was characterized as a Christ-loving atheist. His grandfather, Clemens Vonnegut, was one of the founders of the Freethinkers Society of Indianapolis, and Kurt himself became president of the Humanist Society, taking over for Isaac Asimov.
I was born in 1922, and then I had a father and a brother who believed strongly in technology, that the world was going to be remade. And I was an enthusiast for this too, and I wrote one time that I expected that by the time I was 30, that Popular Mechanics magazine would have a color photograph of God on its cover. Science would have cornered God and got him to agree to oppose and to answer any questions they might still have. And I was a great believer in truth, scientific truth, and then as I wrote once, then truth was dropped on Hiroshima.
David Hume, philosopher. At the age of 27, he wrote Treatise on Human Nature, an attempt to introduce the experimental method of reasoning into the moral subjects, a work that was deemed atheistic, which caused him to be denied a philosophy teaching post at the University of Edinburgh. All of his books were later placed on the Index of Forbidden Books by the Vatican, and he became a skeptic who neither endorsed theism nor atheism, retrospectively classified as a non-believer by Hitchens. In atheistic circles, Hume is best known for his famous 1763 Hume-Holbach dinner party anecdote. Specifically, in the 1760s, Baron de Holbach, who owned this large mansion called Le Château de Grandval, that had a 3,000 book library, used to host bi-weekly intellectual salons where he invited some of the greatest minds throughout the world to come and dine and stay at his mansion, such as Condorcet Harpe, Voltaire, Diderot, Montesquieu, Adam Smith, Benjamin Franklin. And at one of these meetings or dinners, David Hume finally arrived. Hume's first words were, "I do not believe in atheists because I've never seen one." Upon hearing this, Holbach laughed. He said, "Count how many are here. We are 18. It is not too bad a showing to be able to point out to you 15 at once. The other 3 have not made up their minds." Aristotle, according to Voltaire, was accused of atheism by a priest. Aristotle said prayers and sacrifices to the gods are of no avail. According to Hobbes, for reason of fearing the same fate as Socrates, he compromised with the religions of his times in his writings. Ricky Gervais, famous modern atheistic comedian, he says the existence of God is not subjective. Either he exists or he doesn't. It's not a matter of opinion. You can have your opinions, but you can't have your own facts.
You were religious till you were about 8 years old, is that right?
Yeah, I was brought up Christian, yeah.
And what happened to change your mind then?
To a working class mum who, her hope isn't that you become a doctor or a lawyer or an international comedian, it's that you don't die in a barroom fight. And they think the best way to do that is to take on Christian values, which preach immorality, but they haven't got the monopoly on good. This is my point. I'm not a Christian, but I live my life in a good way. And some people say, well, who says what's good is? Well, do you know what? I do. I'm good to people because it's the way I want to be treated. And I don't believe I'll be rewarded in heaven, but I do believe...
What do you think will happen to you?
I'll be rewarded now.
But when you die, what do you think happens?
People who liked me or remember me.
But what happens to you? Anything?
What, my physical body?
Yeah.
It breaks down or
Your
gets
spirit,
burnt.
Anything happen to that?
I don't believe there is a spirit. I think the spirit is an upshot of all your inputs, your beliefs. Some people think you can't believe in love if you're an atheist. Of course I believe in love. Of course I believe in the beauty of nature. I just believe that the earth was made over 4.5 billion years and not by design in 6 days.
Jean-Paul Sartre, famous atheist existentialistic philosopher, he published his 1943 Being and Nothingness, wherein he promotes an anti-deterministic variety of science not based on causality, but of the individual freedom as the foundation of all values. His motto is that existence precedes essence, meaning first man materializes into the world, counters himself, and only afterwards defines himself. James Madison famously wrote the U.S. Constitution in 1787 without reference to God, but instead based on Newtonian social physics, which he learned at Princeton. He said, religious bondage shackles and debilitates the mind and then makes it unfit for every noble enterprise.
Late in his life, James Madison wrote that the belief in a God all-powerful, wise, and good is so essential to the moral order of society and the happiness of mankind that arguments for his existence cannot be drawn from too many quarters. Madison thought that belief in God was vital to a healthy republic, but Madison was also a very strong religious libertarian, we might say. So he didn't want to see any kind of establishment at the federal level imposed on the American people, but he did want a regime of liberty where churches could do their good work of producing Republican citizens and work in an informal fashion, or we might say a pre-political fashion, or even a pre-constitutional fashion.
George Bernard Shaw, playwright. I'm an atheist and I thank God for it. Cicero, Roman Stoic philosopher, he's famous for his On the Nature of the Gods, wherein he used a three-person dialogue to discuss various and contradictory opinions of the most learned men in the world on the matter of the gods. This style was repeated by David Hume and Schopenhauer. Baruch Spinoza, classified as an abstruse atheist. He was classified by Pierre Bailly as the greatest atheist there ever was in 1682. He promoted a God equals nature crypto-atheism ideology, which was adopted by many people thereafter. For example, Einstein used to say, when asked if he was an atheist, that he believes in Spinoza's God, which is polite coded atheism, generally speaking.
Baruch Spinoza, one of the greatest philosophers of his day, was expelled from the Amsterdam synagogue in 1656, probably because of his unorthodox religious views. Ever since, Spinoza has been regarded as the great atheist of the Western tradition. Between the 17th and the 19th centuries, not only were his works periodically suppressed, but even being named a Spinozist could have grave consequences.
Robert Ingersoll, America's greatest agnostic. He was a huge orator, and his view is that the Mosaic account of the creation is an absurdity large enough to throw all nations into a rollicking guffaw, that Adam and Eve never existed, and that the ancient flood and Noah's Ark were impossibilities.
They say that the eternal future of man depends upon his belief. I deny it. A conclusion honestly arrived at by the brain cannot possibly be a crime. And the man who says it is does not think so. The God who punishes it as a crime is simply an infamous tyrant. As for me, I would 1,000 times rather go to perdition and suffer its torments with the brave, grand thinkers of the world, than go to heaven and keep the company of a God who would damn his children for an honest belief.
Thomas Hobbes, political philosopher. Well, in Paris in the 1640s, he wrote treatises on matter and motion, contending that spirit has little to do with the universe. And he's most famous for his 1651 Leviathan, characterized as a crypto-atheistic work, oft referred to as an atheist Bible, wherein he attempted to derive a political theory out of the mechanical view. Hemant Mehta, he's a famous Jainist turned atheist turned blogger who in 2006 sold his soul on eBay for $504 and penned a book about it called How I Sold My Soul on eBay. He's written books such as The Young Atheist Survival Guide, and most people know him from his YouTube channel, The Atheist Voice.
So a question comes up, what are things Christians should not say to atheists? First one, where do you get your morality from? Don't assume that because we're atheists, we don't have morals. We all have morals, we all have ethics. Ours don't derive from a holy book. And I would hope that your Bible isn't the only reason you're not out there killing everybody in sight.
Bill Nye, the Science Guy, he became famous when in 2004 he debated Ken Ham at the Creation Museum. His follow-up book is Undeniable Evolution and the Science of Creation. The book's not that great, but the debate is worth watching.
Either. And then Bill Nye came at him with an excellent response. Take a look.
How does creationism account for the celestial bodies, planets, stars, moons, moving further and further apart? And what function does that serve in the grand design?
Well, when it comes to looking at the universe, of course, we believe that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And I believe our creationist astronomers would say, yeah, you can observe the universe expanding. Why God is doing that? In fact, in the Bible, it even says he stretches out the heavens.
Edwin Hubble was sitting at Mount Wilson, which is up from Pasadena, California. And Edwin Hubble sat there at this very big telescope night after night studying the heavens. And he found that the stars are moving apart. The stars are moving apart. And he wasn't sure why, but it was clear that the stars are moving farther and farther apart all the time. Another astronomer, Fred Hoyle, just remarked, well, it was like there was a big bang. There was an explosion. This is to say, since everything's moving apart, it's very reasonable that at one time they were all together. And there's a place from whence these things expanded.
Hypatia, Greek philosopher. She was a follower of Plotinus, and his view, what motion of the atoms can one attribute to the actions and passions of the soul? Her view is that fables should be taught as fables, myths as myths, miracles as poetic fancies. To teach superstitions as truth is a most terrible thing. The child mind accepts them, believes them, and only through great pain and perhaps tragedy can he or she be in years afterwards relieved of them. The reason for this is that a superstition is so intangible a thing that you cannot get at it to refute it. In the end, she was stripped, stoned, and burned for her anti-Christian, anti-religious, pro-science views.
She was the only daughter of Theon, a Greek scholar and a mathematician, and was generally considered to be one of the most educated men in the city. They had an extremely close bond with one another, and she got from him the same love of learning. From a very early age, Hypatia became fascinated with the subjects her father taught, and she in turn became his star pupil. They would spend countless hours discussing the mysteries of the universe and debate over the possible answers.
Douglas Adams, famous for his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he famously classified himself as a radical atheist. He used this term because if he said he was an atheist, people might think he was agnostic, but he really did not believe there was a God, and he was so convinced that there was not a God, which is a subtle difference, that he used the term radical atheist. Ernest Hemingway, from A Farewell to Arms, 1929, all thinking men are atheists. Lawrence Krauss, one of the top 10 atheism debaters of the last decade, leading New Atheism spokesperson, which he started in 2005 with his debate with Michael Behe. His books are A Universe from Nothing and The Greatest Story Ever Told.
It's a beautiful picture from the Hubble Space Telescope of a distant galaxy, far, far away and long, long ago. And there's a whole galaxy, it's about 1 billion light years away. We're looking at it as it looked 1 billion years ago. So many of those stars no longer exist. And here's an object that's just as bright as the whole center of the galaxy. You'd think it's a star that's near in our galaxy that just got caught in the picture frame. It's not. It's a star on the edge of that galaxy that has exploded. And exploding stars shine with a brightness of 10 billion stars. They're the brightest fireworks in the universe, supernovae. And they're remarkable, and I keep having asides. Maybe I'll get to my point eventually. But this is something that I wrote a whole book about, and someone asked me yesterday why I wrote that book. Because it is the most poetic thing I know about the universe. Richard wrote a great book called, what's it called? Our Ancestors? What's it called? Ancestor's Tale, yes. I wanted to make sure I got that right. And I wrote a book that was a different Ancestor's Tale. It was called Adam. But the amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. Okay? And anyway.
Penn Jillette, number 28, famous from the Penn and Teller Show. In 2005, he gave his NPR talk, There Is No God. And in 2011, he published his book, God No, Science You May Already Be an Atheist, and Other Magical Tales.
And I am a huge fan of proselytizing.
I am a huge fan of speaking your mind. The only way we can share the universe, the only way we can share humanity, is by talking very strongly about what we believe.
You are the chief atheist out there. How did you get here? How did we get here?
Well, let me ask you, how did we get here?
I believe in this superior being, a god.
Of course.
27, Aaron Nelson, famous on YouTube as Aaron Ra. He was once asked why he got into this area of activism. He said in 2011, "I don't like being lied to, and I especially didn't like being lied to as a child."
Y'all know who this girl is? Look at this child. Is this the face of a demon? Or is this the look of a skeptic who's not buying your bullshit? The problem is, it's the same glare either way. And that's why we're lumped in together. This is the way we look when we realize we're being lied to. When you realize that all of the fables in the Bible began in the hearts of superstitious primitives who just made it up. It's man-made mythology, and there is no truth in it. There's no heaven, no hell, no Eden either, and there is no devil. He was invented by Persians, adapted by Jews, and embellished by Christians. He was never the serpent, nor a fallen angel, and he can't steal your soul because we don't have souls.
Abraham Lincoln, number 26. According to his first law partner, John Stuart, Lincoln was an avowed and open infidel, sometimes bordering on atheism. He went further against Christian beliefs and doctrines and principles than any man I had ever heard. Richard Feynman, son of an atheist. He was a closed-lipped atheist. He stated, "I do believe there is a conflict between science and religion." In 2009, he was ranked by Brains.org as the top 50 most brilliant atheists of all time.
If you expected science to give all the answers to the wonderful questions about what we are, where we're going, what the meaning of the universe is, and so on, then I think you could easily become disillusioned and then look for some mystic answer to these problems. We're exploring, we're trying to find out as much as we can about the world. People say to me, "Are you looking for the ultimate laws of physics?" No, I'm not. I'm just looking to find out more about the world. And if it turns out there is a simple ultimate law that explains everything, so be it. That would be very nice to discover. If it turns out it's like an onion with millions of layers and we're just sick and tired of looking at the layers, then that's the way it is. But whatever way it comes out, its nature is there, and she's going to come out the way she is. And therefore, when we go to investigate it, we shouldn't pre-decide what it is we're trying to do, except to find out more about it. And so altogether, I can't believe the special stories that have been made up about our relationship to the universe at large, because they seem to be too local, too provincial. The earth, he came to the earth. One of the aspects of God came to the earth, mind you. And look at what's out there. How can it isn't in proportion. It also, another thing, has to do with the question of how do you find out if something's true. And if you have all these theories of the different religions, have all different theories about the thing, then you begin to wonder. Once you start doubting, which I think to me is a very fundamental part of my soul, is to doubt and to ask. And when you doubt and ask, it gets a little harder to believe. I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. I have approximate answers and possible beliefs and different degrees of certainty about different things, but I'm not absolutely sure of anything, and then many things I don't know anything about. But I don't have to know an answer. I don't feel frightened by not knowing things, by being lost in the mysterious universe without having any purpose, which is the way it really is as far as I can tell, possibly. It doesn't frighten me.
Frederick Douglas, after absorbing the writings of Thomas Paine, Voltaire, and Bolingbroke, he said the church of the country is not only indifferent to the wrongs of the slave, it actually takes sides with the oppressors. For my part, I would say welcome infidelity, welcome atheists, welcome anything. His most famous quote is, "I prayed for 20 years but received no answer, until I finally started praying with my legs." Mad Dillahunty, the lead host of the Texas call-in talk show, The Atheist Experience. He was a former theology student.
But the nuts and bolts of it are that morality, if it means anything, it's about the well-being of thinking creatures, and that's how Sam puts this. And so as physical beings in a physical universe, our actions have consequences that are dictated by physical laws. They are not merely products of our mind. If I punch Russell in the face, that's all determined by the laws of physics in the physical reality. And
I don't like this metaphor.
I know. And but the result of that is harm. Now, you can have conversations about, well, why do we care about avoiding harm, and why do we care about well-being? And I don't care a rip for those discussions, because I'm already fine with saying that when we talk about morality, we are already conceding that we have a concern about well-being. If the only objection is why do we care about well-being versus not, the answer is that we do. We are the products of beings who cared about that, because the ones who didn't care about it died off.
Neil Tyson, he's basically Carl Sagan reborn. He classifies himself as an agnostic, but his Wikipedia page classifies him as an atheist. And he's made a video on how he's tried to correct this several times and change it back to agnostic. And the point here being, you can't really deny who you are.
So if he said, there's dark matter and there's dark energy forcing an expansion of the universe so fast that it's accelerating, you can't explain that. Right. We can't explain it. Okay. I don't think he knows enough physics to be able to tell us what it is we don't understand yet. That would have been a more interesting exchange with the atheist guy. I forgot his name, forgive me, but the guy who he was interviewing. Now, if he wants to use that as evidence for God, but then we just have to come back and say, well, doesn't mean if you don't understand something and the community of physicists don't understand it, that means God did it? Is that how you want to play this game? Because if it is, here's a list of the things in the past that the physicists at the time didn't understand. And a talk show you might have conducted 200 years ago would have said, the planets do retrograde? Can't understand that. Must be a God. And we'd say, you're right. And then 10 years later, we understand it. So what do you do? So if that's how you want to invoke your evidence for God, then God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance that's getting smaller and smaller and smaller as time moves on. So just be ready for that to happen, if that's how you want to come at the problem.
Benjamin Franklin, as a teenager, he left his town in part owing to his indiscreet disputations about religion, which began to make him pointed out with horror by the good people as an infidel or atheist. He famously said, lighthouses are more helpful than churches. Leonardo da Vinci, number 20, he says, take no miracles on trust, always look for causes. In his anatomical notes about fetus is inside of a woman, he questioned why one soul governs two bodies, and states here, Avicenna contended that the soul gives birth to the body and every member, but, as Da Vinci says, he is in error. Da Vinci rejected the biblical flood model per reason that deposited fossils many miles from their origin disprove this theory. Number 19, Madeline Murray O'Hare. She's the person that got mandatory school prayer ejected from the American educational system. So, 2 thumbs up to her.
I was talking with someone this morning who had heard you, I guess on the radio, I don't know, there was a tape show or something, and they said you were receiving, as usual, your usual vilification and phone calls, and I've often wondered, you've spent a good number of your years of your life in fighting causes that are not too popular and cause great emotional reactions in people. When it comes to religion and your famous suit in Baltimore about prayers in school, you led that fight.
Yes, sir.
Does it disturb you when you get such vilification and violent reaction from people? All of a sudden you say, what kind of Christian-like attitude is that?
Well, that always comes to mind, of course, but the most important thing, I think, is that this is their problem. I'm not involved in those emotional, heated ideas. I'm involved in an intellectual pursuit of specific problems in our society, and that's it. It's an exciting intellectual experience, and it's very exciting to uncover the facts that are never told anywhere. But there's no sense in getting angry about it. There's no sense in reacting to anger. I would be down the drain if I did. Immediately tomorrow. And it's their problem. People who hate are in great trouble. And I'm sorry for those people who hate so badly, but I don't hate anybody.
Socrates, number 18. In 399 before Christ's myth, at the age of 70, he was famously put on trial for not believing in the gods of the city, particularly Zeus and his pantheon, and being accused of teaching the youth atheism, namely about daemons, which Socrates considered to be godlike power, fate, spirit guides, or forces of nature. Plato, Socrates' student, was at this trial and recorded that his interrogator, Meletius, said that Socrates did not believe in gods at all. Socrates famously drank hemlock to bring about a resolution of this situation. Voltaire, the world's leading religion satirist, in his 1764 Philosophical Dictionary, his article, The Atheism, presented one of the first cogent histories on the subject. His 1769 God and Human Beings was one of the first works in comparative religion and mythology. He famously said, I want my lawyer, my tailor, my servants, and my wife to believe in God, because it means that I shall be cheated and robbed and cuckolded less often. Also that if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him.
He was dwelling at length on the bloody consequences of religious intolerance. Right from the start, Voltaire's views on religion were expressed robustly. He was not an atheist, in part because he thought that some minimal belief in a deity was useful for social cohesion. Voltaire's God had created the world, instilled in us a sense of good and evil, and then basically taken a back seat. This was known as rational religion, or in the 18th century called natural religion or deism.
Number 16, Sam Harris. The day after 9/11, he woke up and started penning his The End of Faith, which launched New Atheism.
It's true that some people define God as pure consciousness, or as being synonymous with the laws of nature. But if we talk about consciousness and the laws of nature, we won't be talking about the God that most of our neighbors believe in, which is a personal God who hears our prayers and occasionally answers them. So I just want you to be sensitive to this, because if Michael or I say something derogatory about Islam or Christianity, which seems possible, the response from the other side shouldn't mention quantum mechanics. And it shouldn't reference a notion of God that is so denuded of doctrine as to more or less be synonymous with pure mystery or pure information or pure energy or pure anything. So I wanted to plant a flag there where you all can see it, because the God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. It's a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us.
Number 15, German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Now that we've reached Nietzsche, who's shown here at position 15, we must point out that these votes shown here come from 200 people, mostly from Atheism Reddit forum, who submitted or cast 2,000 votes on Ranker.com. When, however, we begin to dig through the annals of world history with the key term Greatest Atheist Ever, we find more correctly names such as Leucippus, Democritus, and Epicurus, Spinoza, Thomas Paine, Nietzsche, world's greatest atheist, Nietzsche, the greatest atheist of all time, Camus, Schopenhauer, Bertrand Russell, greatest atheist of the 20th century, and William Oswald. So in the bigger picture, Nietzsche will rank much higher. He's famous for his 1882 view from The Gay Science, section 125, where he says, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him, yet his shadow still looms. He followed this up with books such as Beyond Good and Evil, On the Genealogy of Morals, The Antichrist, and Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And his last and final Will to Power fragments from 1888, where he attempts to unify all of this and to replace God with a monster of energy, as he calls it, or an attempt at reformulating God in terms of thermodynamics.
Is generally regarded as an enemy of Christianity and superstition, and was certainly an unbelievably outspoken opponent of Christian traditionalism. He also knew that if you let the old gods die, the probability that blood would flood the land was virtually 100%. So let me read you what he wrote. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I seek God. As many of those who do not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Why? Did he get lost? Said one. Did he lose his way like a child? Said another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or emigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his glances. Whither is God? He cried. I shall tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how have we done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continuously, backwards, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying as though through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night and more night coming on all the while? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's decomposition? Gods, too, decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, the murderer of all murderers, comfort ourselves? What was holiest and most powerful of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods simply to seem worthy of it?
Number 14, Epicurus, Greek atomic theory philosopher. According to Epicurus, everything is made of atoms, and atoms move within the void. Gods might exist, but they're made of atoms too, and they have no concern for human affairs. He is the eponym of Epicureanism, which, as he explains in his 280 before Christ myth letter to Minosius, when we say that pleasure is the end and aim, we do not mean that the pleasures of prodigal or the pleasures of sensuality, as we are understood to do so by some through ignorance, prejudice, or willful misrepresentation. We mean pleasure in respect to absence of pain of the body and trouble in the mind. From this, the virtues will grow into one, with a pleasant life, and a pleasant life is inseparable from them. Alan Turing, number 13, retrospectively labeled atheist. His view is that science is a differential equation, religion is a boundary condition. He was charged with the crime of homosexuality, which was punishable in Britain, and sentenced to deconversion therapy. And in protest of this, he committed suicide by eating a cyanide-laced apple, symbolic of eating from the tree of knowledge.
Turing was a mathematician, cryptographer, and pioneer of computer science, whose life was one of secret triumphs shadowed by public tragedy. Perhaps known today for his part in breaking the German Enigma code during World War II, Turing was by that time already established as a mathematician of extraordinary capability.
Thomas Jefferson, number 12. In his 1820 letters, he auto-characterized himself as an Epicurean materialist, and/or a sect by myself, as far as I know. He initiated the wall of separation between church and state in 1802. In 1820, he made his so-called Jefferson's Bible by removing anything that was supernatural from the Bible. In 1786, he initiated the Virginia Act for Religious Freedom, which declared that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever. He translated in the field of religio mythology Constantine Volney's The Runes, which argued that all the pretended personages from Adam to Abraham or his father Terah are mythological beings, stars, constellations, or countries. During his presidential campaign, Reverend Thomas Robbins put things thusly: I do not believe that the Most High will permit a howling atheist to sit at the head of our nation. John Quincy Adams said that if not an absolute atheist, he had no belief in a future existence. All his ideas of obligation or retribution were bounded by the present life. Isaac Asimov, science writer and novelist. I'm an atheist, out and out. It took me a long time to say it. I've been an atheist for years and years, but somehow I felt it was intellectually unrespectable to say that one was an atheist, because it assumed knowledge that one did not have. Somehow it was better to say one was a humanist or an agnostic. I don't have the evidence to prove that God does not exist, but I so strongly suspect that he doesn't that I don't want to waste my time anymore. Moreover, the Bible, properly read, is the most potent force for atheism ever conceived.
I feel that, as seems to me any civilized, humane person should feel, is that every person has a right to his own beliefs and his own securities and his own likings. What I'm against is attempting to place a person's belief system onto the nation or the world generally. We object because we say constantly that the Soviet Union is trying to dominate the world, communize the world. Well, the United States, I hope, is trying to democratize the world. But I certainly would be very much against trying to Christianize the world, or to Islamize it, or to Judaize it, or anything of the sort. And my objection to fundamentalism is not that they are fundamentalists, but that essentially they want me to be a fundamentalist too.
We've finally made it to the top 10 greatest atheists of all time. Number 10, Mark Twain, American novelist. His view is that the Bible has noble poetry, some good morals, a wealth of obscenity, and upwards of 1,000 lies. He saved his sharpest criticism of religion for his autobiography, not published until 100 years after his death per his instructions. George Carlin, number 9.
Religion easily has the greatest bullshit story ever told.
He says, religion has actually convinced people there's an invisible man in the sky who watches over everything you do every minute of the day. And this invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do.
And the invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do.
And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture, where he will send you to live and suffer, scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time.
Till the end of time. But he loves you.
Lastly, says Carlin, tell them this picture of the invisible man in the sky you've just painted is still wet, and they have to touch it to be sure. Thomas Paine, number 8, leading atheistic writer in the American colonies. He says, the study of theology as it stands in the Christian churches is the study of nothing. It is founded on nothing. It rests on no principles. It proceeds by no authority. It has no data. It can demonstrate nothing. Moreover, I do not believe in the creed professed by the Jewish Church, the Roman Church, the Greek Church, the Turkish Church, by the Protestant Church, nor any church that I know of. My mind is my own church. The age of ignorance commenced with the Christian system. His 1794, The Age of Reason, is the most widely cited atheist Bible historically. Speaking of atheist Bibles, historically, in the annals of published literature, there have been 5 books that have been referred to as atheist Bibles or Bibles of non-believers. These are shown here ranked by powerfulness. Number 1, Baron de Holbach's System of Nature, Laws of Moral and Physical World, Ludwig Buchner's Force and Matter, Principles of the Natural Order of the Universe with a System of Morality based thereon, Lucretius's Atomic Theory, presenting on the nature of things, Goethe's Bible overthrowing physical chemical morality based elective affinities, and Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason. Among these, Paine's Age of Reason is the most cited or referred to atheist Bible of all time. Bertrand Russell, number 7, British philosopher, with the publications of his 1927 Why I Am Not a Christian and his 1947 Am I an Atheist or an Agnostic, he became 20th century's number 1 atheist. In his 1959 television interview, he said, "There can't be a practical reason for believing what isn't true. Either a thing is true or it isn't. If it is true, you should believe it. If it isn't, you shouldn't. If you can't find out whether it is true or not, you should suspend judgment." He also posited the existence of the flying teapot orbiting the Earth between the Earth and Mars, and used this as a method of the burden of proof was on the religious to disprove his flying teapot assertion.
Why are you not a Christian?
Because I see no evidence whatever for any of the Christian dogmas. I've examined all the stock arguments in favor of the existence of God, and none of them seem to me to be logically valid.
Do you think there's a practical reason for having a religious belief for many people?
Well, there can't be a practical reason for believing what isn't true. That's quite, at least I rule it out as impossible. Either the thing is true or it isn't. If it is true, you should believe it, and if it isn't, you shouldn't. And if you can't find out whether it's true or whether it isn't, you should suspend judgment. But you can't, it seems to me, a fundamental dishonesty and a fundamental treachery to intellectual integrity to hold a belief because you think it's useful and not because you think it's true.
Richard Dawkins, number 6. With the publication of his 2006 book, The God Delusion, and follow-up debates online and viewable by way of YouTube, he has converted more believers to non-believers than pretty much anybody in the last century.
This is probably going to be the most simplest one for you to answer, but what if you're wrong?
Well, what if I'm wrong? I mean, anybody could be wrong. We could all be wrong about the flying spaghetti monster and the pink unicorn and the flying teapot. You happen to have been brought up, I would presume, in the Christian faith. You know what it's like not to believe in a particular faith because you're not a Muslim, you're not a Hindu. Why aren't you a Hindu? Because you happen to have been brought up in America, not in India. If you'd been brought up in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you were brought up in Denmark in the time of the Vikings, you'd be believing in Wotan and Thor. If you were brought up in classical Greece, you'd be believing in Zeus. If you were brought up in Central Africa, you'd be believing in the great juju up the mountain. There's no particular reason to pick on the Judeo-Christian God in which, by the sheerest accident, you happen to have been brought up, and ask me the question, what if I'm wrong? What if you're wrong about the great juju at the bottom of the sea?
This last video by Dawkins is what's called Religion as a Function of Birthplace. And this video has over 10 million views on YouTube. Historically, however, this argument originated with Michel Montaigne in his 1576 essays, who says, "We have religion because we happen to be born in a country where it was in practice." Shown here, if you were born in one of these gold or yellow colored countries, you have about 95% of being raised a Christian. If you were born in a green colored country, you have a 95% of being raised Islamic. Similarly, in these countries, Buddhist or Hindu, or in a small percentage Shinto. This argument was carried forward by Pierre Chiron in his On Wisdom, who was a student of Montaigne, who says or reminds his countrymen that their religion is the accidental result of their birth and education. The argument again was picked up in 1736 by Lord Bolingbroke, who in his important examination of the Holy Scriptures says that, "To whose guidance shall I submit my mind? Must I be a Christian because I happen to be born in London? Say I was born in Turkey, I would be a Muslim man." Denis Diderot picked the argument up again in 1773, who in his Diderot Barthélemy dialogue says, "You see, my dear Abbé, religion is all an affair of latitude." And then Dawkins, in his 2004 God Delusion, says, "If you were born in Arkansas, you will be a Christian and believe that this is the true religion, whereas if you were born in Afghanistan, you will believe that Islam is the true religion. Both are victims of childhood indoctrination." So, when the person in the audience in 2006 asked these questions at Randolph College, he elaborates on his previous book and speaks of the flying spaghetti monster and the juju at the bottom of the sea. Stephen Hawking, greatest atheist of all time, according to extant rankings, number 5. His motto is, "Cosmology is a kind of religion for intelligent atheists," a view he held in college. His 1988 A Brief History of Time purported to explain the mind of God, which is code for the fact that science had progressed enough by that time to explain all phenomenon that was formerly assigned to the domain of God. Hence, God after that point had become superfluous.
Before we understand science, it was natural belief that God created the universe. But now science offers a more convincing explanation. What I meant by we would know the mind of God is we would know everything that God would know if there were a God, which there isn't. I'm an atheist.
Number 4, Carl Sagan. In 1980, he launched his PBS series Cosmos, wherein he defines himself as star stuff. He showed people how marvelous the universe is without God, His belief is, I am a collection of water, calcium, and organic molecules called Carl Sagan. You are a collection of almost identical molecules with a different collective label.
If the general picture, however, of a Big Bang followed by an expanding universe is correct, what happened before that? Was the universe devoid of all matter, and then the matter suddenly, somehow created? How did that happen? In many cultures, the customary answer is that a god or gods created the universe out of nothing. But if we wish to pursue this question courageously, we must, of course, ask the next question. Where did God come from? If we decide that this is an unanswerable question, why not save a step and conclude that the origin of the universe is an unanswerable question? Or, if we say that God always existed, why not save a step and conclude that the universe always existed, that there's no need for a creation, it was always here? These are not easy questions. Cosmology brings us face to face with the deepest mysteries, with questions that were once treated only in religion and myth.
Albert Einstein, number 3. In March 1954, he stated, I am a deeply religious non-believer. 2 months prior to this letter, in another letter to German philosopher Erich Gutkind, he stated, the Word of God is for me nothing more than an expression and product of human weakness. The Bible is a collection of honorable but purely primitive legends, which are nonetheless very childish. No interpretation, no matter how subtle, can change this for me. For me, the Jewish religion, like all other religions, is an incarnation of the most childish superstitions. This single paragraph found in this letter sold for $3 million at an auction in 2018. Number 2, Charles Darwin. In his 1859 On the Origin of the Species, he showed that humans were not created, but rather evolved over time from chemicals in a heated pond.
Mr. Darwin, sir, it is time to write your book.
My title will be On the Origin of Species.
All of nature is a battlefield. Remind me where I read that.
Clear evidence of transformation over millions of years. The Almighty can no longer claim to have authored every species in under a week. You've killed God, sir.
Number 1, Christopher Hitchens. Born half Jewish, half Christian, turned atheist. One of the greatest atheism debaters of all time. In 2007, he published his God is Not Great, the title being a direct negation of the Arabic phrase Allahu Akbar. God is great, often chanted by suicide bombers before they blow themselves up. His oration is comparable to Charles Bradlaugh, Robert Ingersoll, and Thomas Huxley.
I was just at a philosophical luncheon at the University of Chicago where they teach your brand of atheism and morality in their theology school. But they were congratulating Chicago alderman on his life. And one of the things that they cheered was that he had spent several months with Trotsky in Mexico in 1928. They thought this was really great. And that a group of atheists would cheer a man who'd killed between 40 and 60 million people, and having spent, I would now do it, having spent months with him, and this is something they look up to. And this is the top of the people who do this. The Chinese, who were atheists, killed, 100 to 200 million people? They did 90 million people in one, locking up 2 provinces in the north, and they preached atheism. And Trotsky went and preached atheism across Russia, and then he hung priests from the back of the train. To say that atheism will kill without any limit if it gets into power anywhere. This has been proved from one end of the world to another. After Ethiopia, right, this is your thing. Atheism will kill. There is no defense.
Sir, we need a. Excuse me, sir. Sir, we need a question, please.
No, he's got made a perfectly good question. How can you defend atheism? I mean, how can there be, you say that atheism won't kill? I mean, if you bring atheism back in a government, it will kill as many people.
No, the question, by the way, I thought it was a perfectly well-phrased question. To be an atheist doesn't guarantee you against being a sadist or a nihilist or a fascist or a Stalinist or a Maoist, though it's slightly unlikely I think you'd be a fascist or a National Socialist, but it's I would say, a necessary condition for enlightenment, not a sufficient one. And I'll take your question seriously in the following way. The 20th century totalitarianisms that are accused of being secular, I'll say something about each of them. It was a long question, so I hope you'll allow me. I'll try and condense it. To start with the original 20th century totalitarian ideology, which originally called itself fascism. If in any account you read of fascism, historical account you read, from its origins in Italy, through Spain, Portugal, Croatia, Hungary, Slovakia, etc. If you take out the word fascist and put Catholic right wing, it's the same story. There's no difference. And if you add parties in political alliance with the Vatican, it's the same. All of them. Fascism is another word for the Christian Catholic right wing. In Slovakia, the actual head of the fascist dictatorship was a priest, Father Tiso. In almost every case, the regime was in holy orders and or with the direct alliance with the Pope himself. That's a simple matter. Anyone can check it out. I'm not going to assert it now. I would say fact-checking and I would be as one on this point. Now, that's not completely true with National Socialism. It's true of the Nazi Party in Austria and Bavaria in its heartlands that it begins blessed by the Vatican, by a concordat with the Church, by the Protestant churches also. But it's not true to say it's a Christian movement in quite the same way. It's a pagan movement to some extent. My favorite example is this, I suppose. Joseph Goebbels was expelled from the Catholic Church. He was. He was the only Nazi who was. Why was he expelled? For marrying a divorced Protestant. Magda Goebbels. You see, the Church does have its standards. However, it is estimated by Paul Johnson, Catholic historian, that more than 40% of the Waffen-SS were practicing, confessing Catholics. No one was ever excommunicated or threatened with excommunication for taking part in the final solution. And that was because of the alliance between the Nazi Party and the Church on two main things, anti-Bolshevism and anti-Semitism. Again, I'm condensing a bit. Now, it brings me to the Stalinists. Okay, you're Joseph Stalin. You've taken over Russia. You've been educated in a seminary in Georgia, by the way. Up till 1917, for hundreds of years, hundreds of millions of Russians have been told that the head of the state is a god. That the Tsar is above power, ordinary secular power, that he's the head of the Russian Orthodox Church as well as the... You shouldn't be in the dictatorship business if you can't take advantage of a deep well of credulity and servility like that. It's your golden opportunity. What does he do? Heresy trials. Heresy trials, witch hunts. Miraculous discoveries such as Lysenko's biology, the worship of the leader from whom all blessings flow. As I described North Korea, the most religious state I've ever seen. Mutatis mutandis, this would apply also to Mao's China, with the same background of superstition and servility. Now, for there to be a fair test about this, you'd have to do the following. And no one I've ever debated with has even tried it. So you be the first. You find me a state or a society that threw off theocracy and threw off religion and said we adopt the teachings of Lucretius and Democritus and Galileo and Spinoza and Darwin and Russell and Jefferson and Thomas Paine. And we make those what we teach our children. We make that scientific and rational humanism our teaching. And you find me that state that did that and fell into tyranny and slavery and famine and torture, and then we'll be on a level playing field.
Chinese kings. None of this.
So there you have it. We've counted down the top 375 greatest atheists of all time. A project that took me 18 years to comprise from 2002 to the present. You see here my 175 book Religio, Mythology, and Atheism book collection. So if you feel compelled in any way by this video, there are 3 things you can do. First is to give either a thumbs up or a thumbs down to this video on YouTube. Secondly, go to the link at the bottom of this video which directs you to the ranker.com listing and vote up or vote down at least 10 atheists you feel strongly about. Third, if you see an atheist that I've missed out of this top 375 listing of atheists, go to the link that says add a new name and let us grow this list of greatest atheists of all time.